I'm not trying to present now on an optimistic and rosy vision of the future. I don't want to pretend that there aren't difficult things happening right now, but I do want to put those aside for the moment, because there's so much attention being put towards those things that I think we can afford to maybe take a step back and engage our brains, engage our curiosity, engage our imagination, and think about what might be on the other side of this currently enormous and daunting challenge. What we're here to deal with today is this question of what can we learn from the discipline of sustainability as it applies to the COVID crisis. You'd think, what do they have to do with each other? COVID is this immediate public health crisis, this economic crisis, this financial crisis. Why are you asking me to think about sustainability? Sustainability is some nice to have, but I'd argue that they're actually two concepts that are directly and intimately connected to each other, right? That sustainability has so much to teach us about, one, not only how to navigate this crisis, but how to mitigate and perhaps reduce the likelihood of similar crises in the future, right? And not only that, sustainability gives us some guidance. It gives us insight and wisdom on what it might mean to create a more resilient and prosperous and equitable and sustainable economy on the other side of this crisis, because there will be an end to this. So one of the core ideas of sustainability, and frankly, it's an idea that's been difficult to share in the past, difficult to persuade people of this idea, is that everything is interconnected. How the mistreatment of one species, the unsafe handling of food, or the pathogens that can transmit from an animal like a pangolin to a bat into human food species, how one little virus can make an entire global infrastructure just crumble. But now we can use COVID to explain to other people, to explain to people who might have been on the fence about how important is sustainability really to me, to my business, to my career, to my economy. You can say, look, if we don't start thinking about sustainability now, we're just setting ourselves up for more crises. So typically, people define sustainability in this idea of balancing the triple bottom line. If you're going to take a decision, it has to be in the interests of the economy and society and the environment. And those three things have to be like a three-legged stool. We always get this pushback. Well, but profit always just seems a little more important. Right? People and planet are fine, but if you don't have the profit, that stuff doesn't matter. Typically, the way our economy has operated, the way our careers, our businesses, our countries have operated is that you got to get the profit first. And if you solve that, then yeah, you might worry a little bit about the planet. You might worry a little bit about society. But practitioners of sustainability and academics in particular, they went a little further than this, and they started introducing this idea of embedded circles, right? Where our profit, our economy is really just a subset of what our society tolerates, right? We might think it's so big, it's so massive, there's so many trillions of dollars, it feels like there's so much inertia to it. But so much of our modern economy is something that we chose to design. We chose to design supply chains the way we do. We chose to allocate income the way we do. We chose to create corporate structures and corporate tax rates. We chose to create individual tax rates that might benefit some groups over others. These are all stories that we choose to believe in. They're not objective realities. And so COVID has shown us that, look, our economy at the end of the day has to work for people. And for people, for society to thrive, we have to be living within what our planet can tolerate. And so this gives us an idea of where we might go forward from here. Because everybody's been talking about flattening the curve, except rather than climate risks being on the y-axis there, what you saw was deaths. In order for us to not exceed the hospital resources that our society has, let's slow the spread of this virus so that our hospital resources don't get overwhelmed. Well, this same story is true for sustainability. Business as usual, the trajectory our planet was on, the trajectories our economies were on prior to COVID, we're going to overwhelm the Earth's carrying capacity. But if we prioritize sustainability, if we move away from business as usual, we can actually create an economy that meets people's needs, that keeps them fed, keeps them housed, keeps them clothed, it allows them to earn an income, but doesn't exceed the Earth's carrying capacity. And so there's another big idea that now COVID can help inform sustainability, and how people concerned about sustainability can go to their clients, to their partners, to their colleagues and say, hey, look, this is a lesson. Let's take this forward. So like, consider this 6-step process. This is something that I think is really interesting. Scientists warn us of something, right? Hey, like let's say, for example, scientists in China who were warning in early November, we think there's a novel virus going around. Right? In south of the border, we had politicians saying, you know what, we're going to have this all locked up in no time. right? So you either have cover up or you have denial. But then suddenly the reality becomes too difficult to ignore. Hospitals are overwhelmed. People are dying in the hallways. Ventilator equipment shortages are rampant across the world. And we know what the solution is, right? The solution is shutting things down. It's staying at home. It's maintaining distance from each other. And the longer we avoid that solution, the more expensive it gets, more expensive in terms of human suffering and loss of life. And so you might as well just take that decision and take it early and take it decisively. The longer you wait, the more expensive it gets, but eventually we act. Now that story that I just told could be true of COVID or climate. Scientists have been warning us about climate change for decades. And yeah, a lot of people either said, hey, it's not really happening, or it's not really our problem, or actually we think there's uncertainty, there's doubt. Right? And then suddenly you start seeing changes in average temperatures, changes in extreme weather. You start seeing changes in reliability of food production value chains, for example. And suddenly it becomes just too hard to ignore. And we know that the solution is expensive. We know that transitioning our economy to a more sustainable footing is going to be expensive. No one is suggesting otherwise. But the longer we wait, the more expensive it gets. And so the main difference between all of the things that sustainability practitioners have been caring about for decades and COVID is just pace. Because all around us right now, there's these ideas that the future being present and not evenly distributed, these are weak signals. And that these weak signals are being amplified by COVID, and they're going to become strong signals. So I put a marriage up there because I read recently that the state of New York is now allowing people to get married online. Across the world, people are suddenly figuring out how to build community online, whether it's virtual cocktail parties or virtual dance parties or various games that you play on Zoom, that we can create relationships and create connections with each other that doesn't involve driving or flying. We're also seeing that all sorts of businesses are finding totally different ways of creating value for themselves and for their customers, right? Restaurants now are able to deliver liquor. And we have to ask ourselves, why would we go back? Right now they've found a new revenue stream. They're meeting people's needs. They're finding a way to keep their doors open. Do we need to go back to regulating that? So this is great for consumers, but there's both there's an incredible sort of story of how to innovate and how to declutter a particular transaction. But it also shows that if your business was a brokerage or you were a middleman and you provided some kind of service that was easily digitized, coming out of the COVID world is going to be hard. Because right now, consumers and businesses and governments are more willing to innovate, adapt, and evolve than they ever have been. That's an extraordinary thing to take an advantage of. So there is this concept from political science called the Overton Window, where new ideas enter the world and they start out as unthinkable. But over time, through pressure, through advocacy, through discussion, these unthinkable ideas start to become perhaps a little more radical or even just acceptable. And eventually they become desirable and find a way to translate into policy. So maybe an unthinkable idea used to be that you'd renew all of your insurance online. Or maybe an unthinkable idea used to be that we have to genuinely take into consideration the social and environmental impacts of our economy as we rebuild our way out of the COVID world. And so we have to ask yourself, in your sector, in your career, in your life, what reality of COVID do you want to hold on to? What part of it is good? What's gotten better? What's improved? How do we make sure that we don't revert back to business as usual?